Hello everyone, today I will tell you how to tie such a cardigan with a gradient on a girl, approximately for about 3 years. That is, it's 72 centimeters in size and width. 65 centimeters, plus hood for knitting I use thread merino light thickness 220. Meters per 100 grams, the thread is absolutely not barbed in it. 70% wool, 30% acrylic. I also use hook number 3.5. They have already erased on the recommendation. For this thread, it is written that you can use the hook 1.5 millimeters, but I use a little wider. Knitting will get a little softer and maybe a little bit. I will make a cardigan, and accordingly raglan, for it will be more quickly contacted. To do the initial calculation, the head circumference of 55 centimeters in accordance with the thickness of the thread, and the hook goes to 1 centimeter 1 and 9 columns with nakide in width and 1 centimeter in height, 8 columns with a kiad of 55 centimeters. I multiply on 1 and 9, I get 105 posts with a knockout of -4 loops. That will go to raglan, turns out 101. I divide the column with a wrap by 10. It turns out 10, and 1 I round up to 10 posts with a wrap 10 for me. 3 are 30 columns with a crochet. These 30 columns with a crochet will be counted on the back and on the front of 30 and 10 multiplication by 2. 20 columns with a crochet will be on each side. Goes to the sleeve about the front. I will knit raglan in turn rows. I will have a cardigan with buttons. That is, I will need to take into account that I will have a shelf on the shelf. On average, it will take me 6 columns with a look. That is 3 on each side. That is, on one side there will be 15 posts with nakide and 3 on shelf and on the other half. That is taking into account 4 raglan loops. I will need to dial 110 air. Bietil nabirajem punk destruction takaya odstielka. Alors abbiamo le Murphy, donc nous avons le Pierre Kong. We recruit, according to calculations, 110 air loops, and we recruit our Christmas tree. $110 from a chain of 120 become 10 air loops, with 4 raglan loops in mind here. They once got lost, 2, 3, 4 markers somewhere. We use improvised means. In fact, the most important thing is that these loops then do for raglan what we do next. In these 110 air loops, we tie posts with 1 wrap, make 3 more air loops. The first 3 air loops will occupy us to replace the first a column with 1 kakita here is one which we have on the hook, 1 loop 2, 3. In the 4th column, we tie 1 column with 1 crochet. We introduce an air. The loop is formed by 2 loops on the hook. We tie the first 2 loops. We tie again here. We get the first column with 1 crochet at least once. Again, we make a throw on. We tie the hook. The following air loop, we hook the thread by the hook into the first. The air loop is conducted into the first 2 hinges on the hook. and the next 2 hinges air. We pull the loop, the first 2 loops on the hook, and the next 2 loops we got in total difficulties. Now 4 columns with 1 crochet, the first of which 3 air loops are so tied to. The first loop for raglan, we got the first 18 posts with 1 nakide. Further, we came to the loop when we need to tie 1 raglan. In 1 raglan, we tie 3 columns we remove our marker with 1 print, and we tie it on the hook and introduce it into the raglan loop. Knitted 1 light and the following loops, and in the same way we tie 2 more in knots. Column with 1 bump of the second loop. Here we got 18 air 18. With 1 print, and in the loop of advertising in 19, we tied 3 posts with 1 thread. Further in the next, take the thread of the ring 2. Folding league became air loop. We will tie 20 columns with 1 crochet work. "20 posts with 1 look. These posts with a look will go to our sleeve." See, it's very important here. In the first raglan loop, we would be tied with 3 columns with 1 nakide. These columns are the middle ones. Mark yourself back with a marker as we marked it for that. So that next time in the next row here in this raglan loop, we will tie the next 3 columns with 1 nakide. Further, you again reach the next loop on raglan here. We have a marker marked with a marker, and we tie a raglan loop 303 into this loop. One nakide column 1, 2, and 3. We mark the middle loop immediately with a marker so that we get an even raglan where it didn't move. This is our first turn, if you can call it that. Further, according to our calculations, we are knitting here in this chain of 30 posts with 1 thread. Here we have 30 air loops. We tie in columns with 1 look, nothing changes. So we reach the next loop. Exactly the same thing is repeated. We tie 3 more columns with 1 nakide, 1, 2, 3. We mark medium column and knitted to our next marker 20 columns with 1 crochet, 1, 2, 3, tied another 20 columns with 1 crochet, and we tie the raglan loop 3 more columns with 1 nakide, and here this is our last The front plate should remain 18 air loops. And in these 18 air loops, we have to tie our last bar. We have to tie here. It turned out our raglan for beginners knitters. My advice to you, very carefully, once count to all. The loops converged among themselves, so that here and here there was an equal amount of air. There were no hinges, respectively, under the brag, then columns with 1 crochet. Because if there is allowed here, 21 here, 22, according to your calculations, then thinks, where this 1 loop can come here, there is no confusion here. Count once, and then you can already tie. That is, then do not bother too much. From the counting should be just the same amount, should all coincide. And then you will have absolutely even knitting. All you will be good to start the second. For this, we need to turn our knitting. We turn to the other side. We tie 3 columns, 3 air loops, 1, 1, 2, 3 here. They do not replace the first. A column with 1 nakide, and further by analogy, we tie up columns with 1 nakide, already turn rows to. Here is this loop on a raglan, and from it we will knit 3 columns with 1 crochet. It will be our second row of our advertising, so I tied to this loop on raglan here, should you get 19 posts with 1 crochet, taking into account the first 3 loops of lift, see? It turned out 22 columns with 1 nakide and 3 columns with 1 nakide loop on raglan. Here in the same loop for raglan, we tie 3 column 1, 2, 3. We go to the back. On the back here, we should have 32 columns with 1 look here. We have reached 3 raglan loops, and now we will knot and will tie 3 columns with 1 kekade. Our improvised marker is this loop with which we will tie. We make a nakide 1, 2, 3 here, 3 loops made a corner, and here we are knitting by analogy. "22 posts with 1 kekide in the next loop on the raglan, 3 posts with 1 kekide, and here will be 19, and we turn our knitting to the end of the row on our own here. We have reached the end of the row. Now we will turn our knitting. What else I wanted to tell you? I will knit on the girl cardigan and wanted to show you how to tie 2 air loops in an air and a place there. Where will we have the clasp? I will knit for the whole closure on the right side because what girls are fastened from right to left. Now turn our knitting and begin to knit. I left 3 centimeters for the shelf on mine. Knitting, this is rounded 6 columns with a crochet. I knit 2 columns with a crochet to remove the marker. I marked it to the right side so as not to confuse the knitting. 1, 2, 3, this 3 air. I tie the loops on the rise that replaces the first column with 1 staple in the second loop, a column with 1 jacket here. It's further I tie 2 air loops, 1, 2, we have 2 columns that we skip for the 2 previous loops. And in the third, we tie a column with 1 crochet. Let's tie this one more whole. We will remain for the buttons on which our cardigan will then be fastened. We will knit everything for sure. Just as I said, nothing changes, and we knit to the desired length of our cardigan. I made an advertisement for the necessary raglan length that I need. Means I have a distance which I needed in terms of volume of 63 centimeters, and in terms of arm volume, I have 35 centimeters. That is, I need 17.5 centimeters here. If we measure it out, 17.5 here is my necessary length. Further now, we need to tie our resulting volume. We do it exactly as we knitted in rotary rows. But the only thing I have to, I will show you how to connect the raglan loops together, and I also wanted to tell you a little about receivable. The gradient here does not quite correctly convey the colors. In general, this purple color here, it's displayed a little more like gray, but the point is not that, but the fact that I have a thread in 4. The twisting goes, I divided a little bit of the scrusting on a thread in 2 twisting, and among myself here, I just combine them to get this kind of soft transition gradient in the last row. I took a pink thread and already connected purple. Color with pink thread to make a soft ending pink. Now I will show you how the main thing is to knit the farders and to already knit down in a circle to get soft. We tie the right length here. As always, I do not tie 3 lifting loops, 2 lifting loops. In fact, here, in principle, there are no exact norms that exactly 3 lifting loops are needed for column with 1. It's just that this is a less visible transition. You see, that is here there are no such distances, and accordingly there are no holes. We tie, as always, columns with 1 look in the second loop. Here we have reached our first loop with 3 crocheted stitches and 1 chain stitch. What do we need to do now? Now we do not crochet this distance that we had for the sleeve. We connect it here. Here we find the next loop on the raglan, where 3 crocheted stitches with 1 chain stitch are made, and we crochet into the middle stitch, the connecting stitch. How do we do this? We crochet. Crochet the middle stitch with 1 chain stitch, crochet the middle stitch on the second raglan with 1 chain stitch, and crochet 3 loops together. Here is our connecting stitch. If you need to knit and you are knitting a cardigan for yourself, or you are knitting a raglan for a sweater and you need to make more volume, then you are knitting for an adult girl. Instead of making a connecting column, you can make chain stitches to the necessary volume that you need. In my case, there's no need to do this. I have enough volume as it is now. Next, I continue to knit the stitches with 1 yarn over to the next loop on the raglan. That is, in principle, nothing changes. Here is our connection. Here we have knitted up to the next loop of the raglan. Here are the 3 stitches with 1 yarn over. In the middle loop, we crochet the next connecting column. Skip the loops that will go on the sleeve, and crochet in the middle loop on the raglan. After the sleeve, and crochet 3 loops together. This is what we get. Next, we crochet the same until the end of the row. Here we have crocheted our cardigan to the armhole distance. Already crocheted to be able to work in the round. Now we knit in the round with reverse rows to the required length of our cardigan. In my case, it will be 70 centimeters, knitting